Fourth day of military operations, as Putin puts it, and fourth day of stiff Ukrainian resistance. Welcome to our special live coverage on Al24 News, along with a panel of guests, Valentin Yakushik, Professor of International Relations via Skype from Ukraine, and Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean Professor from the USA. But before we start our discussion, let's have a look to the statistics regarding the number of Ukrainian refugees. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have already left their homes because of Russia's invasion. Many are displaced within the country, and others are looking for safety in the neighboring countries like Poland, Slovakia, Romania and Moldova. First of all, the Ministry of Interior of Slovakia revealed earlier today that 10,526 entries were made only in the last 24 hours. About 15,800 Ukrainian arrivals have crossed the border in the last 24 hours, as the Interior Minister of Moldova, Anna Rivanko, revealed. And finally, about 10,000 refugees are estimated to have entered Romania, as Romania's Interior Ministry has reported on February the 24th. More on this in this report by Nabil Khazini.
A sound of danger, and also a sound of a reminder for thousands of Ukrainians to leave their country as soon as possible. For these people, the world has one direction now, the West, where they make their way to find shelter beyond the Ukrainian frontiers.
Many guys, even before they had to go to war, before the mobilization process, they already knew that they're gonna go. Just they asked volunteers, and so they just asked for a gun to be there. And
according to the UN Refugee Agency, nearly 150,000 people have so far fled Ukraine into Poland and other neighboring countries. The number could ultimately grow to 1 and even 5 million of a population of 44 million who might try to leave their country in the coming weeks.
Travel is very hard, of course, a lot of cars, a lot of buses, traffic jam, and then a big price to get here, and I hope 2, maybe 3 hours and they will come.
Arriving at the Polish border, Ukrainian refugees were warmly welcomed, and a working group was set up to ensure refugees have access to basic infrastructure, means of transport, education and medical help. In Berlin, the first dozen displaced people fleeing the conflict in Ukraine arrived in Germany, as they expect the government to decide on a simplified asylum process for Ukrainians.
Actually, I spoke with my parents before I left Ukraine, and they said, we was born here, we live here all our life, and we just don't want to leave our country.
For now, Central Europe is welcoming Ukrainians with open arms, but the primary receiving countries don't have the capacity to meet those needs on a large scale and on a prolonged basis.
And for more discussion regarding this, I start with you, Hamoud Salhi. Can you tell us a little bit about the conditions in which thousands of Ukrainian civilians are fleeing to safety?
So this is a very disastrous situation. Like in a war, the casualties are expected in high numbers. There is the luck in this case is that neighboring countries, European countries, are pouring their support unconditionally in Poland as in Hungary, as mentioned earlier. But the expectation is to see whether the infrastructure, as mentioned in the report, will be able to absorb this displaced people. Also, there is the legal issue in terms of asylums and refugees and all of that. But at this point, it's a situation that is continuing to be going from worse to worse. And in the short term, there might be some solutions, but the long-term situation has to be sort of resolved in one way or another, perhaps returning to Ukraine, or perhaps finding a way of how the European countries together will resolve, will address this issue.
Welcome to our program. Thank you so much, Hamoud. And regarding you, Valentin, you are living in Kiev. I don't know if you have moved to another place so far. What about the loads of buses moving towards the borders with Poland? Any special assistance, especially during winter season? Can you just describe to us these conditions?
Well, fortunately, it's not so cold now at this time of the winter. But those people who decided to go to the west to flee from the places which are expected to be places of warfare, they are in a very difficult situation. Certainly, there are no casualties there. No war in the roads. But people suffer because of long queues. There are checkpoints on which cars. Well, long queues of cars sometimes have to wait for 4 or 5 hours. Difficult. Sometimes the militias who are controlling these checkpoints may be a bit rude or very rude. As my friends, British journalists said when they were going to Romania, and I was helping them, and they said, well, some militias are rude, and I had to talk. They telephoned me, and I had to talk with these militias, explaining that that's not the way. Good that we have good contacts, and mentioning their names, they started behaving in a different way. Also, what is difficult, the fuel can hardly be obtained by many of those who go by their cars. Usually, they give only 10 liters per car. So, difficult situation.
All right. Okay, cool. Russian forces have entered Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, where streets fighting is now taking place. Residents of the Ukrainian capital reported a massive explosion and other blasts early on today as Russia's war on its neighbor intensified. The head of the Kharkiv regional administration, Ola Sinigobov, said that Ukrainian forces were fighting Russian troops in the city and asked civilians not to leave the homes. Back to you, Hamoud. What is behind or the secret of the stiff resistance from the part of both army and Ukrainian civilians?
I think part of it is that Russia did not expect that this war or this conflict will go longer than what we have seen. On the other side, it does seem, according to certain report, that the Ukraine air defense, for example, is not as weak as was expected. Russia has yet to establish what some reporters are suggesting, control of the air space and defense. The other issue is linked that the Ukrainian president issued a ban of people who are between certain ages, not to leave the country of male, as noted. So that added some factors to it. And then there are other factors. The Europeans, particularly Germany today and Britain, is sending this support. Is another factor that is contributing to this resistance, and it's all I've seen on the battleground. This is something that the Ukrainians are taking seriously. They are defending their country, and there seem to be resisting in ways that are being seen difficult for the Russians to overcome.
All right. Valentin, back to you. How far is this city? I mean, Kharkiv is important to Ukraine, not to fall to Russia's military operations.
Well, Kharkiv was the first capital of the modern Ukraine after the Soviet power came there. For many years, it was the capital. And it is the second largest city of Ukraine. It is very powerful economically, and it is very close to Russia by its culture. It's mostly Russian-speaking city. So President Putin thought that they will welcome him there, and it was a big mistake of him. This is the time of Ukrainian unity. They don't want anybody to come here and rule. Ukrainians want to resolve their internal problems by themselves. We do have them. We really need national reconciliation, but we do not need somebody's help by the armed intervention here. Kharkiv is a key city which shows that Russian army is not necessary here. Go back. And you see, there may be two reactions. One, the local people use cocktail molotovs in many regions, but usually not not in small villages. In small villages, I have the name of one, I will tell, Krukivka in Chernigov region. The local citizens, they came into the streets when Russian tanks and armed machines were coming, and they didn't allow them to go through their village. So this is the reaction. They don't want to kill Russian soldiers. They feel that they are our ethnic brothers or cousins. They don't want them to be dead here. They want them to go back. So this is the strongest reaction. It's the strongest that even the army resistance. Yeah. So there is army resistance. There are local people resistance with cocktail molotovs, and there is a peaceful resistance when saying, "Don't come here. Go back. Save the lives of Russia's children. Right. Don't take lives of Ukrainians."
Okay, this is regarding the resistance of the Ukrainians, and now announced new economic sanctions against Russia on the fourth day of the military operation of Russia. EU suggested blocking selected Russian banks from SWIFT, the global financial messaging system. She announced also the paralysis in the EU of the assets of the Russian central bank, stating that they will stop Putin from using his war chest, and explained that all these measures will significantly weaken his ability to finance his war. Back to you, Valentin. Critics say that international reactions are absolutely weak towards this crisis. Is there anything likely to be done, or is it too late?
Well, the international reactions is absolutely correct in the terms of helping somebody to whom they are not going to give military help by their own soldiers. So what is necessary to Ukrainian army is given to Ukrainian army. Sanctions, strong sanctions are imposed on Russia. Now it's time for another type of international assistance. Now it's time to tell to Russian leadership and to Ukrainian leadership that they should meet as soon as possible and stop war. In first day of war, Russia was imposing on Ukraine capitulation terms. Now, Ukrainian president feels that with the whole nation resistance, it's a popular war, it's a patriotic war against the invaders. So he doesn't want to conduct negotiations. And many Ukrainians say, no, the agreement will be only on our terms. It's understandable, but it's the way to nowhere, because Russian leadership will not accept a peaceful solution on Ukrainian terms. What is necessary to find a kind of compromise? Okay. Better to give a little bit to the leader, which is crazy, that he stops war, that we stop killing each other, and resolve this issue afterward. Russia already has lost its war, but there is chance that Ukraine will be turned in a new Syria if we insist only on our terms, Ukrainian terms of peace agreement. That leads to Syrian terms, where there will be war for a long time.
Yakushik, let's listen to the new economic sanctions against Russia in this piece of clip. All right.
Nous nous engageons We are committed to cutting off a number of Russian banks from SWIFT. This will lead to their disconnection from the international financial system. Their ability to act globally will be weakened. SWIFT is the dominant interbank system globally. This action will prevent banks from carrying out most of their global financial transactions. As a result, Russian exports and imports will be blocked. We will work to prohibit Russian oligarchs from using their financial assets in our markets. All these measures will significantly weaken Putin's ability to finance his war. They will gradually degrade his economy.
Elles dégraderont petit à petit son économie. Nous empêcherons Poutine d'utiliser son trésor de guerre.
We will prevent Russian President Putin from using his war chest. We will cripple the assets of the Russian Central Bank. This will freeze its financial transactions and make it impossible to liquidate its assets.
Impossible la liquidation de ses actifs.
Back to you, Hamoud. Biden says he's keeping assisting Ukraine with military equipment. Don't you think that this would raise the concerns of Russia and push it advance more and stop this from happening? What do you think?
It's a very, very interesting how the Biden administration is going with this crisis. And no doubt what we have seen is that the Russians are very determined in pursuing their goals and achieving it their own ways. What we have seen from the Biden administration and even the Europeans is that they have made it clear, and perhaps this was one of the reasons that led Putin to do what he's doing, that they would not be fighting for the Ukrainians. The Ukraine president, for example, reminded the Europeans that when Ukraine agreed to sign the Budapest Agreement in 1991, the European agreed to protect its borders. So when the Ukraine president reminded them, the response of the Europeans, yes, we did agree, but we did not say we will fight. And that's where it is. The pragmatism that is driving the Europeans and the Americans using the laws and respecting it in ways that they see best fit is what makes it sort of difficult to accept or to take this kind of decision with some kind of confidence that it will pursue. The fact that the Ukraine is not a member of the NATO and the American also system, Congress will not allow for Biden to assist Ukrainian directly are some real issues that the Russians are looking and taking this kind of assistance as less credible, and therefore they would not take it as seriously to stop what they are doing.
Mm-hmm. Two further details. Let's follow altogether this report about what U.S. President Joe Biden said that Russian attacks on Ukraine is still very possible, but called for giving diplomacy every chance of success to resolve the crisis, as prepared by Hossein Berkan.
Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, SWIFT, a global financial artery that allows the smooth and rapid transfer of money across borders. It was established in 1973 and actually started its activities in 1977 in light of the swift development and growth of global trade. The system offers tremendous advantages, especially in terms of process security and execution speed, in addition to being less expensive than other conversion methods. It includes more than 200 countries and thousands of financial institutions and banks.
Around half of all high-value cross-border payments worldwide use the SWIFT network. SWIFT links more than 11,000 financial institutions in over 200 countries and territories. Financial institutions exchange an average of over 32 million messages per day.
If Russia is separated from the SWIFT system, this means the impossibility of sending it money, which puts Russian companies and their customers, including Europeans, in a wide crisis that affects energy exports, which count for more than 40% of the country's revenue.
Doing this would impair Russia's ability to collect international profits from its oil and gas exports, which account to more than 40% of the country's revenue. The sanctions on Russian banks are possibly more severe than any SWIFT cutoff. Russia's $635 billion in currency reserves helped to shield this blow, but a lot of these reserves are in things like gold, or they're being used to stabilize the ruble, or some are even in foreign banks.
Experts say that the issue of withholding countries from the SWIFT system, as happened earlier with Iran, and incurring huge losses, represent an economic pressure tool that has very difficult repercussions on the economic situations in the currency. According to the Russian Realist Center for Experts, it is possible that Russia will consider any exception to the SWIFT payment system as a declaration of war, and it may respond militarily.
Back to you, Hamoud, for more insights. The banking system SWIFT is actually mutually beneficial for Russians along with European major economic countries, including Germany. If SWIFT sanctions are imposed, this would badly affect the economy of these countries as well, no?
It's very interesting, and we have to really look at this decision, the Europeans and the Americans agreeing to use SWIFT. For some obvious reason. I think the goal of this latest decision is aimed towards the putting the ruble into a situation of free fall. Your report indicated that very much. The rest is really left to guessing, and we need more information. For example, we know at this point SWIFT was not introduced because of the mere fact that, as you said, Nadia, it is a mutually benefit, and its implementation will affect everyone involved in a transaction, meaning that the system is based on a payment or transfer of payment through the system. Therefore, it will affect everyone, and it is expected that 10 to 14% of the global economy will be affected. That's number one. The second one, that we have seen that the Europeans and the Americans in this latest decision say they are still working the mechanism of how to implement these latest measures. Specifically, the Europeans, Italy and Germany, we have to wait to hear from them, have had reservation about implementing the SWIFT for the obvious reason. In Germany, for example, will be affected about 40% of its trade. And this is why the energy also is left out of these measures. So in many ways, SWIFT is a very sort of complicated matter. And we have seen the Europeans and the Americans being very pragmatic, presenting news and taking decisions that are linked directly to the ruble, but without or somewhat leaving, at least at this point, from what we've seen, some critical issues working the mechanism of the SWIFT. And this is basically because, Nadia, SWIFT is a very credible system, and there is no alternative at this point that would
very credible system, as you have put it. Now, Valentine, Biden said that imposing sanctions on Russia was the only way to save us from a third world war. Do you agree?
Well, there was no chance for a third world war, as the United States wouldn't dare to use its forces to fight against Russia, even if they didn't use force against North Korea when they were threatening North Korea. So there is no threat for a third world war. There are some limitations. Even crazy leader of Russia wouldn't do anything. So this is a kind of local conflict in geopolitical terms. And by the type of operation, Russia planned it as a regime change operation, easy changing regime, like the United States have changed the regime in Afghanistan or in Iraq successfully at the first stage. But then they failed because it's not possible to impose to some other civilization the rules of another. So Russia encounters the same thing. The regime change operation have failed. Now it is fighting between two neighboring countries. Sometimes some international actors, in fact, are happy with that, like a long-term war between Iraq and Iran, Would you remember that? So, but now we are more humanistic. We understand that sometimes the authorities or when most important international actor plans one thing, but the result is different. Destruction of Saddam Hussein led to
Yakushik, we better just keep with Russia and Ukraine so far, and let's move all together to this piece of information where Russia has established attack lines into 3 regions of Ukraine, toward Kiev, the capital, from the north, toward Kharkiv from the northeast, and Fanin out from Crimea in the south. Ukraine has also fought Russian-backed separatists in the Donbass region to the east. Russian forces have attacked oil and gas facilities in Ukraine, sparking huge explosions overnight. But Ukrainian forces were holding off Russian troops advancing on the capital, Kiev, President Volodymyr Zelensky said as the assault entered its 4th day. Valentin, back to you. What is your stance, honestly, towards Russian civilians protesting against the Russian military operations, who were even detained, as we have all seen?
Those Russian protesters, they have heart and they have wisdom. They are heroes. And in the situation of an authoritarian state where the leader became really crazy, it's especially difficult. They know what they were doing. Really, it's important. But it's not a decisive factor. In Russia, there is state propaganda where they know that all Ukrainians are under the pressure of nationalists and so on. They do not understand that this is a popular, a patriotic war now. Russia must stop its military activities here.
Thank you.
For that, it is important the Western support for negotiations to start. If we don't want to create in Russia...
We will dig into negotiation file just a bit later. And back to you, Hamoud Salhi. Turkey has announced it won't close its strait in front of warship, let's say, so far. Why so?
Well, it's a matter of how you interpret law and international law. And in this instance, just like what's happening in a war, you take the side or the interpretation that supports you very well. So from this perspective, Turkey has sovereignty over the trades, over the waterways, and all of that. But it is also a binding. It is binded by international law. And at issue is really Article 19 of the convention, the 1936 Montreux Convention, which was signed by Turkey, United Kingdom, the Soviet Union at the time, and other countries. And it basically allows warships belonging to the Black Sea countries to sail through the strait without any intervention from the Turkish government, as long as they are not threatening its national interest. So from that perspective, the Turkish are saying, look, we are implementing international law. Well, the Ukrainians are saying, wait a minute, you are not using that correctly, and therefore you should reconsider and close the waterways. Turkey, from this perspective, is acting in its own national interest. It doesn't want to get directly involved with Russia, but more than anything else, Turkey, if it's getting a conflict with Russia as a member of NATO, it will commit the United States to intervene alongside Turkey against Russia. So there is possibility of escalation in that case, and perhaps with the consultation of the United States, we don't have any information, as many just guessing at this point, but perhaps this decision was made in consultation with the United States, NATO headquarters and leaders, and in an attempt to avoid any direct confrontation between Turkey and Russia, which would ultimately bring the NATO into this conflict. And at this point, point, the NATO is not ready to do that for the obvious reasons.
Okay. It's worth mentioning that police detained hundreds of peaceful protesters across Russia on February the 24th, 2022, at rallies in solidarity with Ukraine and against the military operation. Many of the protesters said they were ashamed of their nation. The authorities also arrested at least 2 human rights defenders who spoke up against Russia's full-scale incursion in Ukraine, threatened to block mass media outlets in case their reporting on the war differed from the official narrative, and demanded that foreign social media platforms stop restricting reports from Russian state media. And for more protests around the world, let's follow this report by Miriam Zian.
People across Europe gathered in cities to denounce Putin's military operation, including in London, Munich, Geneva, Edinburgh, Dublin and Paris, as well as across the globe. In London, hundreds gathered outside Russia's embassy in Kensington and Downing Street, where eggs were thrown at the embassy as people attending the protest in the British capital shouted Putin stop war, among other slogans. The crowd, wearing Ukrainian colors around their necks, waving flags with traditional flower headbands, sang Ukrainian songs.
I want to support the people who are there. My mom, they were bombing Kiev at 3 in the morning. I could hear. I was on the phone with her. You can only imagine my heart and what I'm going through, because she's there. I cannot help her, and I can only be here and pray and just show the support. We need to unite. We need to show that we're strong, and we need to please stop. Please stop. Sit down at the table. Talk. We're in 21st century. We can talk.
In Germany, thousands of people protested Saturday in Munich and other German cities, and a protest is scheduled for Sunday near the Brandenburg Gate to draw 20,000 people. Switzerland saw thousands of people gather across the country, including about 1,000 outside the United Nations European headquarters in Geneva. In Finland, thousands of people gathered in the capital Helsinki, shouting Russia out, down with Putin. Meanwhile, at least 492 Russian protesters who joined the chorus of condemnation and urged an end to the bloodshed were detained on Saturday in 34 cities, which brings the total number of arrests to more than 3,000 since demonstrations began Thursday. Moscow's incursion has sparked global outcry and prompted punishing sanctions from the West, including some against the Russian president.
Back to you, Hamoud. Russian high-profile negotiators have already arrived to Belarus for negotiations. It is just a significance that Putin is still keeping his words towards being open to negotiations when he was pushed to this military operation, according to him, of course. Any comments regarding this?
It's very interesting. Like any conflict, there should be a way out for seeking this kind of negotiation. But this has some different meanings. And number one, it comes at a time when it is not clear how the Russians are proceeding and will proceed next. So from that perspective, it could be seen as looking for a political solution to resolve the Ukrainian crisis. Connected to that is that it seems also that the Russians are calculating that the longer this conflict continues to be played on the media and shifting more and more to presenting it as a humanitarian crisis, what we've seen recently, for example, continuing to do more, this will be a bad publicity for Russia, and it will rally the international civil society, as we've seen so far, growing more and more, that the street that Europeans will start and Americans will start to demonstrate in the streets against them, and therefore calling for negotiation at this time is to avoid or that kind of negative publicity that may ensue from this conflict taking longer and longer from resolving it. So at this point, it's still premature to determine whether the call was sincere, genuine, and whether it will lead to some kind of practical solution. We have to wait, Nadia, for a few more, maybe hours or days.
You said we will see if it is sincere and honest. And like this, I'm going to put it to Valentin, a chance to stop the bloodshed and the sufferance of escaping civilians million Ukrainians in front of President Zelensky. Why did he refuse to sit for negotiations, according to you?
Well, Zelensky refused to sit for negotiations because he again feels force, feels power of Ukrainian nation, not just of Ukrainian state. The state was very weak. It was controlled by oligarchs. It was corrupt. It was dependent upon the external actors. Now it's powerful. And there will be no return to the previous situation. Zelensky will not be this kind of a leader as before. The military and the people with arms will not allow it. They will not allow to deal with them as just slaves or second-rate citizens. It's changed. He's strong now. What is necessary now for Ukraine? It's that the West abrogates the debts of Ukraine, more than $52 billion. One of Ukrainian opposition leaders, Yulia Tymoshenko, former prime minister, said this debt should be crossed out from it. Then European Union should give better conditions for association because it was very unfair towards Ukraine. And hopefully Europe will agree now that Ukraine can be member of European Union. If European Union accepted such countries as Bulgaria or Romania, now it has all possibilities to accept Ukraine. So this will be one of the conditions in finding a compromise. When the West will show what it will do for Ukraine, then there will be possibility to save a little bit the face of Russians, not to destroy them directly. Because if there is a strategy for destroying Russia totally, you will have a new kind of Al-Qaeda or ISIS of Daesh. The West is not interested in that.
Let's see what the upcoming days might reveal regarding this. Thank you so much, Valentin Yakushik, along with Hamoud Sarhi, for joining us during this show. And finally, let's see how world press has highlighted its newspapers regarding Ukrainian and Russian tensions with our special journalist who joins us here in our studios, Melissa Noor Khimilet. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Nadia, and welcome, dear viewers. So in today's press review, Nadia, Illusions of Diplomacy and the Ghosts of War in Ukraine is a title chosen by Al-Quds Al-Arabi for its cover in its weekly edition. The newspaper saw, in contrast to the clarity that characterized the Russian military invasion of Ukraine, the geopolitical purposes that can be integrated with it are not as clear, Nadia. So the goal of establishing the separatist entities of Donetsk and Luhansk, or the prevention of Ukraine from joining NATO, are not worth all the risks that Moscow will have to take. Sharq al-Awsat has entitled in its newspaper, by the Kremlin escalated its rhetoric against the West in the face of the continuing path of isolating Russia and imposing firm sanctions against it, in a move that the newspaper described as a point of no return in relations. The British Guardian asked in an opinion column why the West always loses to Putin and whether the Allies dare today to overthrow the Russian president, I say, after they failed to prevent the invasion. The author of the article believes that in confrontations with Vladimir Putin, the West fights with one hand tied behind its back, and it does so by choice, out of shame, greed, and laziness. And laziness. So it does so by choice, and which has been the case for more than 2 decades, the author says, and it is also the case now in Ukraine. In the developments of the military operation on Ukraine on its 4th day, the British daily The Sun wrote that fierce battles are continuing on various fronts as the Russian military operation enters its 4th day. Sirens sounded in the capital Kiev after it was exposed to a new wave of what it called the Russian bombing, or the bomb blast. While world markets shiver in fear of a new economic downturn, we read in Le Monde that Europe is facing the specter of energy shock, and it is currently avoiding sanctions on Russian hydrocarbons, which, even if that means financing Vladimir Putin's war or regime in order to limit collateral damage to its economy. Among other newspapers that agreed on Le Monde point of view that the first outcome of what is happening in Ukraine is linked to a possible first-time rise in energy, gas and electricity prices, the Algerian newspaper El Mujahid, which wrote that the European Union is highly dependent on Russia for its supply with natural gas. Le Figaro newspaper considered the Russian control of Chernobyl is more symbolic than dangerous. However, it warned of the increase in radiation levels at the crippled Chernobyl nuclear plant after the Russian forces took control of it on the first day of the operation in Ukraine, given the strategic importance of the site, which is still emitting nuclear radiation since the worst nuclear accident in the world, which contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Al-Arabi Al-Jadid, the newspaper, also focused on one of the risks that the crisis between the two countries poses to Europe and shed light on the situation of Ukrainian refugees, as footage showed Ukrainians rushing to the roads, fleeing by cars and trains, and a number of them arriving in neighboring Poland. At the newspaper warned of a renewed refugee crisis in Europe, it pointed out that the continent is on the cusp of a new crisis that needs solidarity and organization. A World in Search of a New System is the title of the editorial published by Al Arab newspaper. Its writer says that Russia's entry into Ukraine is militarily turning a page in international relations under an American administration. That is content, or that we see that the United States is content with watching what is going on in the world. That's it for me today, Nadia, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That's all for today's live coverage. Special coverage on Alt24 News. Special thanks to my guests, and World News program is up next. Bye-bye.